All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time to, join us on this event. I am Alexandra Nyamoyabui, Alex, and I'll be hosting this event with George,
Hi,
who
everyone.
is in Leeds, in the UK. And I am currently in France. So for those who want to send some messages in French, you can do so. And of course, today we're here to talk about the future of the football economy with Professor Simon Chadwick. Before you introduce yourself, or I'll let you introduce yourself actually, can I talk about the final of the Euro for a second? Or you want to cry in front of people?
Hey, you raise the subject, you talk about it. I'll sit and listen. I'd rather talk about the weather, but
of course. How do you feel about that?
Isn't it the case that the best team always wins?
Oh, that's nice. That's really good. Okay.
That's my that's my contribution to the discussion.
There you go. Really diplomatic. Let's go then. Let me introduce yourself first, so we can dive into the questions just afterwards, because we have a lot of things to cover: economy, diplomacy, and I'm pretty sure people are will be willing to ask some questions afterwards. So, Professor Chadwick,
thank you. So I am Professor Chadwick, although my mother calls me Simon. I'm the missing link between Alex and George in that I am supposed to be in France, but I'm actually in England, and as George already knows, I studied my PhD at the University of Leeds.
Best university in the world.
Absolutely. Now, this is my alumni too, the best university in the world, although other universities that I've attended are also available. What I do is I work at Emlyon Business School, which is a global top 50 business school. Our main campus is in Lyon, but my base is in Paris. We have a campus in Paris, and I also work extensively out of our campus in Shanghai. And what I do is to write about, comment upon, teach, and do lots of other things around what I would broadly term the geopolitical economy of sport. And I think particularly in terms of today's session, it's important to use that term, because we're not just talking about football players and football clubs and private owners. We're talking about states and governments and lots of other things. So that's me, Simon, from Lyon, geopolitical economy of sport.
All right. So Alex from Lyon will be asking you the first question, even regarding the academia. Is sports diplomacy something really understood by higher education? Really?
That's a really good question. I'm not even sure that I understand it, and the reason that I don't say that I don't understand it is because I've always worked in business schools. So I'm not a political scientist. I'm not an international relations scholar. I am historically a marketing professor in a business school. But if I could give you one illustration of how I find myself where I am now. If I take the example of Gazprom, so Gazprom is a Champions League sponsor, UEFA Champions League sponsor. It also announced a much bigger and broader deal with UEFA just before the Euros to sponsor the Euros and various other UEFA tournaments. The crucial thing about Gazprom is two crucial things about Gazprom is number one is it doesn't sell anything to people like us. So, it's not Heineken, it's not Sony, it's not McDonald's, it's Gazprom. So it doesn't sell things to the public. It sells gas to governments. And the other thing is that it is a majority state-owned corporation. So it's essentially a Russian government entity. And from where I sit, and going back to Leeds University, my PhD was about football sponsorship and football sponsorships back then. Keeping in mind that I did start my PhD in the 20th century, back then, sports sponsorships were about selling burgers and soft drinks.
Yeah.
This appears to be something very, very different. And so going back to your question, I found myself as a business scholar thrust into this area because sponsorship looks very different to how it used to look. But moving on from that, what I would say is that there appear to be relatively few institutions in the world where there are sport diplomacy programs, where you have academics working and researching in the field. And I think, having said all of that, it is something that suddenly people are waking up to. And there's a group at School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London, which has a very particular interest in this. There's an Israeli academic working in the United States, Yoav Dubinsky, and he writes a lot about Israeli diplomacy through sport. And so we are on the cusp, I think, of the emergence of this relatively new field.
All right. It's interesting. Maybe we'll do our master's degrees in that field. Why not, George?
Yeah, why not?
But with this subject that we have to cover today, actually, let me give you a bit of my background. So, although I live in France, I'm from Burundi, which is in East Africa, and we are known for being runners, like Ethiopians and Kenyans. And but we do love football, and we've been seeing how sports has been changing in the last decades. And my first question for you, Simon, will be: what have been the biggest changes in the footballing world over the last, few decades?
Okay. I mean, I guess broadly, there's kind of been, I think there's been a kind of, some people would talk about commercial revolution, but I think I would add a dimension to this and introduce a managerial revolution into that too. So a lot of people tend to look at big money and commercial interests, and that is important. And if I had to choose an illustration of this, 1992 is the illustration, because in 1992 the English Premier League was introduced.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really important to keep in mind that one of the purposes for establishing the English Premier League was to make more money from football. Yeah. That was one of the stated goals from the outset of the new league. And so in many respects, the Premier League has done exactly what it set out to do, which is to make money. Now, whether you like that or not, that's a different matter, but it's done what it set out to do. What a lot of people tend to ignore, though, or tend not to kind of realize, is in 1992 UEFA's Champions League was rebranded and relaunched. So for those of you who are old enough to remember, it was called the European Cup when I was a kid. It wasn't called the Champions League, and there wasn't the Star Ball, and there wasn't the theme tune, and there wasn't the stadium dressing, and now this is what we have. So I think those two things together really resulted in what is now a very commercially oriented, particularly the elite professional level game. But hand in hand with that, I think has come a focus on a more managerial orientation, or managerial efficiency, if you like, inside the sport and inside clubs. If you go back to the early 1990s, when I first started researching and writing about football, the person in charge of marketing was a former player. And these former players very often, they left school at 16. They played football until they were 35. They were servants of the club. The club thought, "Oh, what can we get? What can we give them to do? Oh, we'll make the marketing manager." And what we've seen since then is very often people that I teach, graduating from very good business schools, very well qualified, going to work in football and taking a very different view to these old club stalwarts who've worked in football. So there's been this managerial and commercial revolution. Now, this has taken place at the same time, and obviously it has been both independent, but it also has interacted with digital technology. And we know that if you go back to the late 90s, there was a big, not just an industrial .com boom, but a football .com boom. And so the role of the internet was significant. The role of social media became important. I think what we're now beginning to see with new investment coming into the sport is the significance of over-the-top broadcasting, which is obviously digitally driven. So I think there's something about digitalization. I think there's also something too about geopoliticization.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when you start to talk about not just about Gazprom that we've mentioned already, but about Qatar buying Paris Saint-Germain, Abu Dhabi buying Manchester City. But I think ideologically, I think what we've also seen recently over the last 12 months in particular is United States private equity investors buying into football.
Yeah.
So more than being just a game where some people kick a ball around, it's I think over the last 30 years, it's become commercial, it's become geopolitical, it's become digital. And there are other things, like lifestyle change, and maybe we'll talk about that later. But that, in essence, I think is what has happened.
Okay, fair enough. So, kind of following on from that, then, what was really going on with the whole European Super League project? Because obviously that's the big talking point of this year. What was the driving force behind that?
I think it essentially at the heart of all of this, cutting away all of the the controversy and the diatribe and claim and counterclaim. Fundamentally, there is a belief amongst stakeholders across the world. For example, private equity investors in Asian nations. There is a belief that there is considerable latent value in football.
Mm-hmm.
And that latent value comes from, really, I guess, some of the things that I've talked about already. Historically, football hasn't been run as a business. Football hasn't been run for political purposes. Football has been run to play football matches. And yet, as we know, billions of people across the world engage with this sport. How they consume, how they lead their lives, what they talk about, the things they do in their spare time, etc., are all linked to football. And so there is this, I think there is this realization globally that in many ways, certainly commercially and perhaps politically too, football punches below its weight. Mm-hmm. And it could punch above it much more, maybe even punch above its weight. So this is where the Super League comes in, and it's absolutely vital to keep in mind for people who are perhaps not familiar with this area is that Super League proposals have come and gone before. Yep. So the last time the Super League proposal was simmering was 2007. And it was really interesting, and I don't think coincidental, that the Super League proposal in 2007 emerged in April, and this year the Super League proposal emerged in April. Mm-hmm. And the reason that's significant is because UEFA was going through the process of reviewing the Champions League, and in both cases was about to launch new Champions League proposals. Yeah. And just as a quick side issue, in amongst everything that happened in April, what many people may not have spotted is that UEFA actually confirmed its proposals to change the Champions League in 2024. Yeah. So, given the amount of given the latent value in the sport, and given the jockeying for power in the pursuit of the benefits of that latent value, I think what we found ourselves at this April was the Super League. And there's always this view, I think, in Europe, amongst the European clubs, that for the likes of Real Madrid and Manchester United and Juventus, there's almost a sense of injustice on their part. Mm-hmm. Because their feeling is that they're the ones who make the money for UEFA. So it's not Scunthorpe United, and it's not Lens, and it's not Real Betis in Spain. It's actually those big clubs. So all the Chinese people are in who watch the Champions League, and all the people in South America who watch the Champions League, they're there to watch Juventus against Real Madrid. Yeah. So I think that these clubs feel emboldened. They always feel emboldened to press UEFA for a bigger share of the revenues. And if we go back to 2007, Michel Platini and his sidekick, you've got to keep in mind his sidekick at that time, Gianni Infantino, who is now FIFA president, what they were really, really smart at doing is they effectively said, hey, we've got to look after everyone. We can't just look after you. We've got to look after everyone. And what they were very good at doing is they just baked a bigger cake. So the big clubs got the same slice, they got the same share, but the cake was bigger, so they got more. And I think Platini and Infantino are not often given credit. In fact, they're not often given credit, full stop, but they've often not given credit for the actually quite shrewd way in which they did that back in the late 2000s and into to the next decade. This time, the Super League proposal, I think, in essence, was a similar thing.
Right.
It was an attempt to make sure that the big clubs got a bigger share of the revenue. The Super League has not gone away, because this is an ongoing battle. This is an ongoing simmering feud, and there will be certain times, certain tipping points where United and Inter Milan and the others will say, oh, okay, give us more. And because of this perceived power that they have, they will always feel emboldened to challenge UEFA.
But the whole project was obviously overwhelmingly unpopular. I mean, how do we stop a project like that being floated again? Is when you look at Germany and you see they weren't getting involved, the 50+1 model, is that a good idea, or does that bring its own problems?
Well, overwhelmingly popular amongst whom? Because one of the things that I didn't mention at the start when you asked me about the changes in football over the last 3 or 4 decades is globalization. Yeah. Because there is significant latent value to be extracted from TV rights deals in China, or from the market for merchandise in India, or from this kind of sport crazy nation that suddenly has switched onto football called the United States. And so I think that all of those protests outside football stadiums, and I think particularly of Chelsea here, that almost for me felt like the cries of the powerless in response to globalization. And just as many of us have thought about, Starbucks and Amazon really don't pay enough tax, and it's really unfair that these industrial mega corporations are polluting the environment, and we somehow feel powerless to stop this. I think what happened on that Monday when we saw fan protests was almost a similar kind of reaction. So it was a cry for help that football had been taken away by these global forces, and I think it's a metaphor for 21st century living, and that's what many of us are now protesting about on social media or wherever else it might be.
Yeah, and do you think fan ownership is an option? Can we bring that back from where it's got to now?
And I'm not going to say no. I think that's a really interesting question, because obviously you've alluded already to what happens in Germany. In Germany, we have a 50+1 rule. The 50+1 rule, for people who are unfamiliar with it, is 50% of a club plus one share must be owned by the fans, and that ensures fan democracy and good governance. But there is a debate in Germany right now about whether that is restricting the development of German football. Right. So just as everybody, just as football fans in England are kind of throwing their arms up in the air and crying with despair that they can't impact upon their football clubs, yet still enjoying their 95 million pound signings. Yeah. Fans in Germany are kind of crying and holding their arms up in despair and thinking, well, how do we compete with Qatar-owned Paris Saint-Germain? How do we compete with Abu Dhabi-owned Manchester City? I think what Europe, from my perspective, what Europe has done and what European football has done, it is sleepwalked into this problem. The reality is that I think, particularly following the financial crash in 2008, economically, Europe is not the power that it once was. And we are now confronted with the realities of this. And again, I talked about a metaphor for the modern age, and the Super League and the debate about fans and should they be involved with their clubs, and is it better to have the Abu Dhabi royal family owns your club and to have lots of signings and have so those kinds of debates we should have been having a long time ago, and I think the European Union in particular should have been performing a role in that regard. But I guess in my this is just me as an academic talking, what does what I say matter, and do I influence things? I just talk, and maybe some people will listen. For me, what I would do is I always use the example of brewing, the global brewing industry. Because again, when I was a kid, not that I drank a lot of alcohol when I was a kid.
No.
I only drank what my parents gave me. But if you go back to the 1970s, 1980s, and there were lots of breweries, and there was lots of choice. And there were lots of bars. If you come to Britain, and I'm thinking particularly Britain here, there were lots of bars. You could go to lots of different places to drink beer. But eventually, a lot of those breweries were bought by major global corporations, and for those of you who know, the global brewing industry is dominated by, I think, about 6 or 7 major breweries. And so whether you're drinking Staropramen in the Czech Republic, or you're drinking Soixante-Quatre, somewhere else, you're probably drinking the beer of a major industrial corporation without realizing it. But what we've seen in Britain, and I think the same is true in places like the United States, is essentially beer drinkers saying, we don't want this. We actually want to drink our beer. We want different beer, brewed in a different way, available in different places. And so we've seen the emergence of the craft brewing industry. And the craft brewing industry is about enthusiasts with a passion for the products that they create, selling in really very different places, and they are successful. They are sustaining themselves. And so I think, for any football fan out there who's saying, well, we need to run football in a different way, you're going to have to step up and do it yourself, because UEFA's not going to save you. Your government's not going to save you. The Abu Dhabi royal family is not going to save you. But I think you can look to the craft brewing industry for an example, for an illustration of how in this industrialized, globalized world, there is still a place for a local brewery, a local football club, products and goods and services that really mean something to you.
Okay. Well, that sounds hopeful then. But going back to kind of these huge entities that have got involved, what have been the motivations of American companies to do it? How does, why is that different to the Qataris getting involved, or, like you say, the Abu Dhabi royal family? Like, what are the motivations behind these foreign entities, particularly investing in European football?
I think with the Americans, and we've obviously the Americans at Manchester United, at Liverpool, at AC Milan. We've seen minority interests being taken in other clubs across Europe as well. Well, the one thing that I always find interesting about US sport is that United States, unlike France or Britain or China or India or wherever else, the United States doesn't have a sports ministry. So it's essentially USOC, the United States Olympic Committee. That's the kind of de facto sports ministry. But in essence, what I'm saying is the market decides in the United States.
Right.
And why that's of significance to your question is the Americans are in football to make money.
Of course.
Period. And that's it. And this goes back to this point I made about latent financial value. They can see that Manchester United is just as powerful as a brand across the world as maybe Starbucks or Amazon or Google, or so that's what they see. I think there are some overseas investors out there that have engaged for reasons of vanity and status, and I think, for example, about the owners of Leicester City, I would argue that they're there for reasons of status as much as anything. You look at China, we've seen a surge in investment over the last 5 or 6 years from China, which seems to have subsided now, and China has divested itself of some of those assets. But that's very politically driven. I think Chinese investors over the last 6 years have been driven principally by the perceived goals or the perceived desires of the state.
Yeah.
I think Russia and Russian influence, and thinking specifically here about Abramovich, but there are other Russian investors. For example, there have been Russian investors at Bournemouth, at Reading. You've got them at Monaco as well. Is again to kind of build Russia's sphere of influence and to build the Russian network of individuals and corporations connected to football. Those countries in the Gulf, Qatar and Abu Dhabi being two, but we hear lots of rumors about Newcastle United. Sorry, not Newcastle United, Saudi Arabia and its intentions to buy maybe Newcastle United or another club. These are countries that are hugely dependent upon oil and gas revenues. They're looking to diversify their economies. They're what we call rentier states, and rentier states are states that, as I've characterized them just there, is resource dependent. And what they're trying to do is to establish investments that generate revenue streams elsewhere in the world. So it's lots of different reasons. I think the only other thing that I'd point out at this stage is this growth of kind of networks and franchise networks. Mm-hmm. Many people would associate this with the City Football Group. But I think you've also got to look to Red Bull, which has a similar network. But you've got several other networks as well. And I think the way in which people are seeing these networks is their value chains. So they're a way of using a franchise model, a global franchise model, as a response to managing the value chain. So, for instance, franchise clubs are a way of acquiring and managing talent, because obviously that's a really significant resource that most football clubs are based upon. And I think rather than using ad hoc scouting networks, these more professional type organizations, these managerial organizations that I referred to at the start, this is all part of the way in which they're trying to achieve a return on investment from their acquisitions.
All right. Before I go to my next question, actually, I will just have to ask about the American interest on the European football. We do understand, like, maybe easily when it comes to the English Premier League, but I'm thinking about the McCourt family who owns Marseille, Olympique de Marseille. What do they see there? Like, what is their interest? Because to buy Marseille, you have to really know the city, to know the Marseillais people. It's a pretty particular city in France.
It's one of the when I first started working for Emlyon, I stayed in a hotel and I watched a Marseille game on TV. And at the end of the game, the manager of the team had to go to the tribune behind the goal and talk to the fans. And when I was with my French colleagues the next day, I said, "So what was that all about?" And they said, "Well, in Marseille, you've just got to be very careful with fans." And I go, "Okay, so explain it to me." So, "Well, if you're not careful with fans, you will get shot." And right, okay. So I don't pretend to know the Marseille fan culture, but I know that it's very unique and very distinctive. But I think that's stepping aside from my personal experience and the socio-cultural or the political aspects of this. That kind of passion. This is what brands spend millions of dollars trying to achieve. Yeah. So if you think about, you think about a bank or a financial services brand, or you think about, I mean, let's be honest about it. There's some of those brands that I've talked about before. Starbucks, Amazon. I don't personally, I don't feel particularly passionate about them. So what you have there is you have clubs, which, when you look at them as brands, in many ways embody everything that marketers and commercial people seek to achieve or secure with the businesses that they run. And so I think a lot of them think, okay, there's something there, and we can work with this, we can make money from it. And clearly this passion transcends boundaries. I mean, I do have kind of a soft spot in my heart for Marseille, because you go back to the early 1990s and they signed Chris Waddle, an English guy. He's from the same home area as me. The Marseille fans still love Chris Waddle. I somehow hope that the French love me in the same way, an English guy in a French institution. And so, that kind of boundary spanning passion is something that in commercial terms is hugely valuable. I think your observation about McCourt and Marseille is a particularly interesting one, because I don't think McCourt has had it easy. And I think he possibly underestimated what it takes to successfully harness the power of those brands. But notwithstanding those observations, I think it is all about what the industry calls these kind of passion drivers that are associated with sport that lures them in the first place.
Oh, interesting. And for those who may not know, he used to own the Dodgers before he sold it. So he's a passionate guy, I guess. But there is something interesting about sports, obviously. And sometimes we forget about that, is how important sports really, football, in economic sector. I'll even ask if you have like numbers about like GDP numbers associated with it. For example, for Spain or England, what does it mean to be involved in sports, in football?
That's a really great question. And I guess there is a fundamental issue at the heart of all of this, because if you look at the numbers, and there's a study by EY, Ernst & Young, of the economic impact of the Premier League. Yeah. The numbers are actually not that big. So if you look at, for instance, numbers of people employed, so the EY report, and there have been a couple of these EY reports, Premier League sustains about 100,000 jobs. But there are lots of different types of jobs, and they're not necessarily good quality, high-level jobs. Yeah. So 100,000 jobs, and in terms of tax contribution, £3 billion plus. Right. Okay. So, I mean, obviously £3 billion is still a lot of money, but in the great scheme of things, it's not a huge amount of money. So in one sense, you might say, well, there's an awful lot of hype about the football economy. And there are a lot of speculative investors. There are a lot of hawks and bulls out there that really talk up the sector. And so to that extent, I think you do sometimes have to be very cautious in listening to or responding to the hype. But having said all of that, I mean, obviously the EY report is just about the Premier League, and it's just about the league itself. If you begin to aggregate clubs and leagues and competitions across the world, it suddenly starts to get a lot bigger. But I think the other thing I would say too is that football is only one part of the ecosystem, because of course a lot, in addition to the clubs and the leagues, what you have is you have broadcasters, and you look at, for instance, the OTT broadcaster DAZN, or DAZN as some people might know it. This is a business that is effectively being created and is being sustained by signing deals with football competitions around the world, or football leagues around the world. And so when you begin to aggregate all of this, the sponsorship spending, the media coverage, the economic impact on local communities. Just to give you an example, again, there was a study several years ago about the economic impact of football on Merseyside. So Liverpool, Everton, Tranmere Rovers, and you were talking upwards of somewhere around £600 million economic impact. So it is there. And the influx of managers and commercial people and those who perceive a greater commercial benefit or economic benefit from football. Obviously, this is one of the big challenges, is to understand how big is it? How do we take advantage of that? how do we make it bigger? And so it might sound as though I'm kind of dancing around the periphery and not answering the question. I mean, there is actually something quite fundamental to saying all of this is we actually don't really know how big the football economy is worth globally. And I think there is a need for somebody scientifically to establish what we think the size of the economy actually is.
Wow. Okay, it's interesting. But one thing is for sure, one thing that we do know about is that streaming platforms are changing the way we consume TV. And it's definitely changing something about in the sports industry as well. I remember watching Roland Garros on Amazon Prime. What would I have thought? My question for you will be, is the way we consume football and sport in general changing? And, for the future, I will assume in next 2 years, 5 years, what will be the impact?
Alex, all I can say is you're just a disgrace. There's only two ways to watch football. Yeah, it's either in either in a stadium or on your couch at home watching on TV. Amazon Prime. What is this? What is this Amazon Prime of which you speak? What is this?
Back home, I would have watched it on SuperSport, which is
exactly.
South African.
Yeah, go to a bar and watch it. Amazon Prime.
Rules.
You're such a 21st century girl. I can't believe it. I mean, and I think that's actually really kind of in spite of my flippancy and humor, it's actually a really important thing because I'm a middle-class, middle-aged white guy, as you may have spotted. And for me, watching football means go to the ground or watch on TV at home.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. This is my big confession. I actually confessed this on Twitter a couple of months ago, but this is my big confession. I've never had a Sky Sports subscription. So therefore, I've never watched a Premier League game on TV from start to finish, ever.
No way. Wow.
In 30 years, I've never seen a Premier League football game from start to finish on TV, because why would I pay for my football? It's supposed to be free on TV. Because that's that's how I was born and brought up. You get your sport free on TV, on terrestrial TV. But of course, I'm a dinosaur. White guys no longer rule the world. Digital technology came, and so there we are. And I think clearly digital technology is very, very important. And I always have in the back of my mind particularly over the last 5, 6, 7 years, we've gone from 90 minutes to 90 seconds. And so rather than and let's be honest about it, and I am as usual, by now I'm kind of flippant about all of these things. One of the reasons that I actually don't sit down and watch football on TV is I don't have time. I just simply can't. I don't have time. I've got other things to do. I've got a life. So my tastes and preferences have changed, and if I can consume on my mobile in 90 seconds, then I'm going to do it, because then I've got more time to do lots of other things. Your question is a really interesting one, and it's just occurred to me is what has digital technology done to us? I think what digital technology has done to us is it's conditioned our behavior. And if I think about my son as an example, if I was trying to get my son to sit down for 90 minutes and watch something, it's like, he's not going to do that. Why would he do that? And I think we have, including me, we've all been conditioned to consume in a different way. And I think with the likes of Netflix and for me, Netflix, we may not realize it, but for all of us who've been locked down over the last 16 months, at any time during the last 16 months, and the number of Netflix box sets that we've gone through and obviously binging on box sets, which has become a kind of social phenomenon. Sport is not immune to that. It's not exempt from that. And I think you go back to Amazon, watching on Amazon, we know that, for example, the new Premier League season, Arsenal, the documentary series will come. We've already had Tottenham, we've already had Sunderland, we've already had Manchester City. Now we're going to get Arsenal. Yeah. And it's in that kind of development that I think investors see latent value, because people like you, Alex, people like you, not people like me, people like you buy it.
We do. Plus, it allowed me to watch Djokovic and Nadal. So for that, I'm really grateful for Amazon.
Well, I'm just a fool because I'm denying myself the opportunity to be part of this community.
That is interesting. But then again, my question will be interesting. I have to show you two things because we're both Lyonnais. I'm now wearing this is a jersey. There you go. And then this one.
Oh. Is this this is actually your shirt?
Those, yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, forget the Lyon shirt. Yeah.
Women's team. Come on, Simon. Come on.
Not the men's fair guy. Enough. Okay,
yeah,
fair enough.
There you go.
Okay, fair enough. But for me, the Nigeria shirt
there you go.
is iconographic, and it's not only a design classic, but it embodies the future of Africa.
Absolutely. That was actually my next question, because I grew up in Africa and we consume football differently. I didn't go to stadiums until I came to France. I never really had a Burundian jersey. I never bought a French jersey. But then I realized, like, I reached a time where I lived in Lyon. Lyon women are like the best team in the world. And I needed a jersey. I'm a Manchester United fan, if I can say. And I realized, like, I want to push this women's sports differently. I want to push, if I have to buy a Chelsea women's team, I'll buy it, jersey. So not a team. And I realized, like, I am not committed to one particular team at the moment, because I have my own agenda is to push the women's team. And my question to you will be, in general, are people committed to one club nowadays?
I think many of us, not all of us, but many of us, we do live in a fluid world. We live in a world of globalization and digitalization, and we can access and consume not just football and football clubs in different ways, but everything in different ways. But I think what globalization and digitalization has allowed us to do is to engage with clubs and athletes, players in a different way.
Yeah.
And again, for people who look like me, they'll talk about history and heritage and town and place. Whereas if you talk to people who don't look like me, especially those who are younger, they will talk about things like console games. And what the research seems to be suggesting at the moment is that rather than engaging with a team, younger audiences may instead be identifying with a player. And if you look at if you look at this research, when young people are asked why are you a Paris Saint-Germain fan? Well, because I'm an Mbappe fan. I guess the better example is, why are you a Ronaldo fan? Well, I'm a Ronaldo fan. Sorry, why are you a Juventus fan? I'm a Juventus fan because of Ronaldo. When he was at Real Madrid, I was a Real Madrid fan. When he was at Manchester United, I was a Manchester United fan. Yeah. And so this suggests a more fluid, a more fluid notion of fandom. And there are a lot of people who keep saying to me, "No, you're wrong. No, you're wrong. No, you're wrong." And hey, I'm not saying that every single football fan under 30 follows a player. I know that people are still born in places and they still identify geographically with a particular location. But I think what I am saying is just as diversity in life is an issue. In general, I think diversity in football and diversity in football fandom is much more significant now. So, you can walk around the streets of Lyon and say, well, you know what, I'm a Middlesbrough fan, or you can walk around the streets of Shanghai and say I'm a Manchester United fan, and because of the fluidity of, I think, 21st century living, but also the diversity of choice. And the acceptance of diversity in our way of living, then it is more acceptable. It is acceptable to say, well, I'm a Ronaldo fan. And when he moves to the United States, when he goes to LA Galaxy, I'll be an LA Galaxy fan. So that's very different to how it was in 1980.
I think so many things are changing in the last 10 years. But the good news is the women's football is changing as well. That's
well, women's football is changing. We in our preparations, Alex, when I went out walking the other night, I thought about our exchange when we were preparing for this, and I'll say it. I'll say it because it's kind of funny, but it's true to a large extent. Is a bunch of men just realised that half the population isn't male, and also that half of the population, they spend money on stuff. And so, I think the male part of the population are kind of thinking, oh, we've actually stupidly missed that opportunity for the last, however many decades or centuries, or but I think the other thing as well is obviously women have I think women have felt empowered to start speaking about and to work in and promote women's football. I think women have stepped up, and there has been a reaction. So if you look at a lot of clubs, if you look at a lot of sponsors, they are now, you've got women in important positions, and they are prepared to not just talk about it. They're prepared to invest time. They're prepared to invest money. They're prepared to try and develop in the right way. And you're sat in Lyon at the moment. I think Lyon as a club is a fantastic example of, there's something in, there is actually something in this women's football.
Absolutely.
You can build a club, you can build a team, build a club. You can become world renowned, not just for being a great supporter of women's football, but actually for being successful as well.
Yeah.
So you then go into, you go back into, branding and commercial success and overseas development and growth, and so in some ways I'm just kind of, so what? I'm kind of inclined to say, so what? So what? What all we're doing is what should have been happening all along. Just as men's football has been the norm. I think what we're now starting to kind of, we're not there yet. I think we still got some distance to go, but we're starting to get to the point where it's just kind of, well, Lyon women's team, fantastic, yeah. So what's why do we need to point that out? That's just how the norm should be.
Yeah. Absolutely. And if I can compare Lyon with Jean-Michel Wallace, who invested for the last 10, 15 years, actually. So kudos to him. And you see the new team, the new American team that is being founded like
Angel City.
There you go. And my first fear at the beginning, I was happy to see that there was a football team coming up. And then I realized, do people who are invested actually in the company understand of football? And then I realized no, but they're pushing something. If you have a team in LA, you have the presence, you have a Natalie Portman and Jennifer Garner, Alexis Laurent. Do we have to do this to bring only celebrities in order for us to have someone out there? Plus Naomi Osaka, who bought North Carolina, I think.
Yeah. I think my view is football should employ the best people for the job, the best people out there for the job, whether they're female or male. They should employ the best people for the job. Now, I know that's very easy to say because societally, we still know that there is still institutional sexism, and that many women across the world don't have the opportunities to go to university, to go to business school, to set up a business, to invest, to earn money, etc., etc. So I understand all of those things, but I think it'd be great if we got to a position where men and women equally could be represented in football, in a way that the best people for the job get those jobs. But maybe I'm being too idealistic, maybe I'm being naive, but I think two things I would say as far as Aulas is concerned. I mean, I bow my head, I tip my head and say what a great job that he and his club have done. And we have to be grateful to Lyon for what they've achieved and what they are helping to change. But I think it's right that you point out, wouldn't it be great if Aulas was actually a woman? Mm-hmm. So it was actually a woman who had been industrially successful. So she'd made her money by being a successful businesswoman. And she decided that what she was going to do is she was going to invest in the development of a women's team. So I take nothing away from Aulas, but I think what we do need is we do need female investors. Yeah. And so the examples that you gave of Natalie Portman and Naomi Osaka, there's obviously Eva Longoria at Angel City as well. I think we have to suspend our unease with the notion of celebrity. And personally, what I would prefer to do is to celebrate the fact that these women were prepared to do this, and not just prepared to do it, but one of the things I particularly like about Angel City, they signed a deal with Birdies. Birdies is a women's footwear brand. So this is a football club by women for women, and what they're doing is they're signing commercial deals with businesses run by women that are meeting the needs of the female population. Now, the Birdies footwear brand, as part of the contract with Angel City FC, they're allocating 10% of contract value to projects that empower women to become leaders and managers. And so I think that this is, and that's absolutely crucial, because I think one of the things that I feel just kind of a certain sense of unease about is that at the moment women's football is just a commercial pile-on. Yeah. So all the men are there because they can smell a buck, and so they think they're going to be able to make money from this. Yeah. And that Birdies Angel City deal, hey, this is not just about selling stuff. This is about trying to effect positive change in aspects of female lives. And I don't, in gender terms, I think that's a good thing in gender terms, but I also think it's a good thing in terms of how businesses and football clubs should operate. Mm-hmm. And maybe as we get fewer testosterone-driven macho men running football, and more females who bring a different way of thinking about and conceiving of the game, that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff you've said throughout the whole event really is, for someone that is a Middlesbrough fan, for example, or someone that supports a local team, a lot of this is what they hate, because they have a team. They can't imagine following a player. They follow a team, and it's that team till they die. Now, and this isn't in relation to women's football at all, but at what point did it go wrong? Where did it change? If you had to pick one point, where did football change to be irreversibly different to what it once was?
1992. I mean, I think 1992 is the year. You got to keep in mind, particularly in European football terms, and I apologize to anybody who's not from Europe who's here today, but as we all know, I mean, it's an inconvenient truth for lots of reasons that European football dominates. I think we are going through some changes now, but up until fairly recently, European football by and large has dominated. And so 1992, Premier League and the Champions Leagues, both starting the same season, but then very, very quickly after that, 1995, the Bosman ruling and the freedom of movement ruling. And I think these things were happening at the same time, obviously. And this is why, you see, I know the town I'm from, yep, and I know the people I speak to. And George, you know what it's like, because you come from a similar town, and yep, and most of the people that I speak to in my town, even my friends from school, years and years ago, we've been friends for years, and when they speak to me, they look at me as if to say, this man's mad. I see the current environment as one of the most exciting periods of human history. We're living in the middle of a revolution. And you either go with it, you're not going to stop it. You're not going to stop it. You either go with it or you go crazy. And I've made a personal choice to go with it, but a lot of the people in my hometown have chosen to resist.
Yeah.
And so they do feel disenfranchised and alienated. And I think from my perspective, what I always try to do is to say to people, look, these are giga changes. They're not just mega changes. These are giga changes taking place. This is going back to the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century. And you think about the Luddites and the machine breakers, and that's where we are now. So these people who now are saying, well, I'm going to support my club and I'm not going to change, and I'm going to go to the stadium, and I don't want to watch on Amazon, and they're resisting something that in the end that it will just engulf everybody. And it will engulf everybody because I use the example of my son. My son always, whenever I speak to my son about the internet, he always laughs, and he says to me, what, you used to use a cable to connect to the internet? And I just think, oh my God, I remember the time when you couldn't pick the color of your phone at home. The state telecommunications company would give you a phone and that was it. Yeah. And yet here's my son actually can't conceive that he would have had to put a cable in his computer and attach it to a socket in the way. You just can't understand that. So that's where we are. That's where we're at. We're living in the middle of a revolution. And I think the unfortunate thing for people like me is in the end we will die, and what we will be left with is generations of people who watch on Amazon and use Wi-Fi and support a team that isn't in their country and identify more with players, and maybe they're more interested in esports. Maybe they're interested in the Euros. Last summer in 2020. UEFA ran the Euros as a replacement for the Euros. Maybe we'll just sit at home and watch other people playing on console games. Who knows? But I think that, having said all of that, I do still think there is a place for meeting people face to face in a stadium and watching a crap football team like mine. There's something about that, and it's. I don't think that's an age thing or a gender thing or an ethnicity thing or a geographic location thing. I think there's something fundamentally inside all human beings that we like to congregate and watch a ceremony and feel emotions. And so I'm not about to say football's going to die. I just think that there's an awful lot of flux and an awful lot of change around it.
My last question will be then, hopefully it won't be a yes. So I'm super biased on this. What do you feel about the esports for the future?
So League of Legends World Championship final, which over the last 2 years, in October 2020, October 2019, was held in Shanghai, drew more than 100 million views online both times. In 2019, I can't believe I'm saying this. In 2019, 30,000 people went pretty much every day to a stadium, an esports stadium in Shanghai, to watch people play computer games. Wow. Now, they say, in some ways, it's actually really funny, because when I was at school, I always remember there was a cafe in town, and they used to have a Space Invaders game. And this was the only Space Invaders game in town. So everybody used to go and watch people playing Space Invaders in this cafe, because it was like, whoa, what is this? Like, this is, the future has arrived. So I can't maybe criticize this too much, but 30,000 people watching in Shanghai in a venue. People last year in Shanghai, the 2020 League of Legends World Championship final. There was restricted entry into the venue. So I think it was only 12,000, maybe 15,000 people in Shanghai were allowed to watch. There were 540 applications per ticket to go to the venue to watch.
Wow.
So I know I'm talking about China, but if you replicate this into South Korea, the South Korean government even has an esports strategy. In many ways, South Korea right now at this point is the esports capital of the world. I've talked to people in South Korea about this, and they just speak a language that I don't understand. I'm not saying this South Korean. And obviously, I'm not great at South Korean, but they start talking about PC bangs, and hey, what's a PC bang? But PC bangs in South Korea are a phenomenon. You look at Denmark, which has a government strategy for esports. You have Saudi Arabia, which is threatening to invest millions of dollars into making the country a global esports hub. Again, these are giga changes. It doesn't matter what I think. It really doesn't matter what I think, because it's just like waiting for the wave to come. And I can hold my hands up, but it's going to crush and crash over me sooner or later. There's nothing I can do to stop it.
Yeah.
So you're super positive for the future then?
I think one of the things about esports, again, in terms of economy and industry and business, it's going to be huge. From those who make the equipment through to those who develop the games, to sponsors, to cities that host events, to industrial clusters. I think it's a crucial thing. I think the industrial clustering is going to be a really important issue when it comes to esports, and this is one of the reasons why I think Denmark in particular has got an esports strategy, is because if you can create an industrial cluster that gives you a competitive advantage, it goes back to that, it's export earnings and tax revenues and jobs. And so I think in that sense, we've got to look at this optimistically. We've got to see it as an opportunity. But in addition to that, again, I'm one of the few people who looks like me, who doesn't talk about the damage that it's doing to young people. Mm-hmm. Because I think that what I've experienced is it's just an incredible way for young people to talk to each other, to build communities, to learn how to live with others. And again, if you think about it, you're online with people from all over the world, people who otherwise you wouldn't know and you wouldn't talk to. And those conversations are not, right, I'm going to shoot you. No, I'm going to shoot you. Very often, hey, who are you? Where are you? How do you live your life? What are the things that you do? What are your values? So I think that esports is potentially provides an opportunity for people to engage with one another in positive ways that we've not seen before. Again, before somebody says, hey, Simon, but how about, I know that these environments can be toxic. And I know that the way in which some people engage with these sports is not positive in many cases. It can be very negative. But I think that's for as a global society, as a global community, this is for us to try and deal with and to handle and to understand. And just to kind of one final point, in sports, one of the things we know is the IOC. Sooner or later, the IOC will include esports in the Olympics. They will, because they already have a working group that has been exploring this. Yeah. But one of the things that the IOC has said already is no shooting games. So whatever comes out of this, whether it's a virtual world or whether they commission Konami to create a game for them, or however this ultimately becomes, what the IOC have said at this point is no shooting games. So together we can do this. We can do this. We can embrace the change positively, but we can also try and address some of those more negative aspects.
All right. Thanks for that, Simon. So that's, I think, the end of mine and Alex's questions. But if anyone does have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat. We had one that came in very early on, actually, that from Adnan, that said, very interesting to hear about the sport diplomacy. Kosovo, as one of the youngest countries and not recognized by all UN member states or by the UN, is using sports diplomacy to promote its statehood. But the football economy in Kosovo has no focus at all, neither by public nor non-public sector. So the question is, what should small countries like Kosovo do to benefit from the football economy?
What I would recommend that you do is you look at the work that is being done in Wales. And there is a guy called Gavin Price. You'll find him on Twitter. And Gavin is part of a team. So Gavin is Welsh. He lives in Wales. He's a big sport fan, but he's also a sports diplomat too. But Wales is spending a lot of money on using sport as a tool of diplomacy, and they're very. You find it on you find some of the presentations on YouTube. You'll be able to look at some of you can find some of their work on if you Google it. But I think that there is a growing realization now that for small countries, sport diplomacy can actually be a very powerful tool.
Yeah.
So Wales is one example. Another example is Qatar. I guess in many ways, Qatar is the best example, because here is a very small country, fewer than 3 million people. You drive, if you start in Doha and drive all the way around the outside Qatar, you'll be back in 3 hours. So it's a very small country. And yet you think about what Qatar is now doing in terms of not just hosting events, but also influencing decisions inside governing bodies. I think it's the time is now for small countries to be looking at sport, because I think it can deliver a disproportionately large number of benefits if you get it right. And as I said, look at Wales, look at Qatar. I think they're two great examples. I think I've just noticed that. Yeah, Brett. Thank you, Brett. Brett's my webinar groupie, so he works as my he works as my unofficial research assistant. So thank you, Brett. So Brett's put Gavin Price's Twitter handle in the discussion forum.
That's great.
Okay, does anyone else have any questions that they would like to ask themselves, or post it in the chat? Or Ian, I know that you had a question that you'd like to ask, so you feel free to ask that now if you'd like.
Hi, I can see there are a couple of other questions coming in on the chat as well.
Yeah, so can I just say, Ian, I apologize for interrupting. Brett has just posted something really important. Over the last week, Lindsay Sarah Krasnoff has just announced this new initiative to build to kind of strengthen diplomatic relations between the United States and France through sport diplomacy. So again, if you don't know Lindsay Sarah, I do follow on Twitter, but she's doing really, really interesting work.
Yeah, if I may plug something here, because I host a podcast called Sportive, which is about sports and women. And I invited actually Lindsay, and she spoke about the French initiative, and it was like 3 or 4 months ago. So for those who would like to listen to that.
Yeah, we'll make sure that we share a link to that on our social media as well, so that everyone can find that recording that Alex did previously.
There you go.
Sorry, Ian. Yeah,
no worries. Hi. So my question is around a lot of the football economy, at least till now, since 1992-3, when Premier League was launched and what have you, is funded by subscriptions to TV channels. And I think that's male dominated mainly, but what would it take for women to decide to subscribe to pay-to-view sports channels? And would that have an impact if suddenly the market was more balanced? Would there be more women's sports if there was an audience willing to pay for it?
That is in many ways that's a big question. It's a good question, but it's a big question. And as you will know, Ian, if we take the example of cricket in England, this is the point at which lots of French people suddenly start ending their engagement with this Zoom webinar. But you'll know, Ian, that when cricket was put behind a paywall and it was subscription, it suffered. Cricket suffered. Yeah. And I think it's only recently begun to recover as there has been some free to air cricket coverage on English TV. So there is no doubt that putting something behind a paywall does impact upon people's engagement with it. And also the kind of socio-demographic composition of those people who engage with it. So that, I think that's one thing. I think the other thing as well is historically women's football has been ghettoized. So I can think of women's sports that have been broadcast in kind of very late at night, kind of half-hour highlights programs. Instead of being primetime TV on a Saturday afternoon, or kind of 7:30, 8 o'clock kickoff in the evening when lots of people are watching. So I don't just think it's about payment. I also think it's about it's about the points at which coverage is delivered. Yeah. There's also something too about the packaging and positioning, because and one of the interesting, again, I speak from an English experience. I watched the Euros in England. And what struck me about the packaging and the positioning of the coverage is, instead of a bunch of blokes, particularly white blokes, instead of a bunch of white blokes talking football, there was a much more balanced gender composition, and in terms of ethnicity, there was a much more balanced composition of commentators and summarizers and people who were asked for their views on the game, and that, for me, that marked a very, very sharp and distinctive change in tone. Because even if you go back to the 2018 World Cup in Russia, I think that for me, the BBC and ITV's coverage of the 2018 World Cup in Russia was still very white, with very male.
Yeah.
This year, and you'll know, George, because I guess that you watched that, BBC ITV coverage was far less white and far less male.
Yeah.
And it didn't feel contrived. It didn't feel forced. It actually felt very natural. For me, it felt very natural, and I hope for many other people too. So, as I said, I think there is something about putting it behind a paywall. There is something about the scheduling. There's also something about the packaging. And if women's football is going to be embedded ultimately in within popular culture in the same way that men's football is, I think those are three key areas that we've got to pay attention to.
Okay. I am also conscious of time, because we've already run over by 20 minutes. So if anyone else has anything to add, then please.
We're just jamming. We're just talking about football. That's all. It's not really a webinar. It's just a group of friends, in a pub talking about football.
It's the best way. So if anyone has anything they'd like to ask it now.
There was one other question we had. We just had sent in. It was about will the French league ever be able to take on the four big leagues in Europe? Will it ever get up to that level? What, if it's a yes, how would it get there? And if it's a no, what structural issues mean that it won't ever get to be as big as the Bundesliga or the Premier League?
I mean, I think it's something actually quite fundamental there. Can it? Yes. Will it? I don't know. Mm-hmm. Now, the basis upon which I say this is that if you go back to 1988, Italy's Serie A was the league. It was the league. It had the big TV contracts. It had the big sponsorship money. Some of the most successful teams in Europe were Italian. The big stars went there. You think about Van Basten and Klinsmann. That Italy was it. And English football knew that it couldn't compete. And so English football essentially took a step back and said, okay, what do we need to do to compete? Yeah. And this resulted in the publication in 1991, I think, of something called the Blueprint for the Future of Football. And in that Blueprint for the Future of Football, it said, set up a Premier League and try to make more money. And in doing that, what you can do is you can think long-term in terms of, for instance, improving your national team performance. England just made a final. Yeah. So when it comes to France, can it, will it? Yes, it can. Will it? I don't know. I think what it really takes is that France has really got to get to grips with the problems that it faces. And it's got to create a strategy. It's got to create a vision for the future, and it's got to create a strategy linked to that vision of the future. and then be able to operationalize whatever it is that they see as being the way to get there. What I find ironic about all of this is that in many ways what the English have done is looked at the French and it looked at Clairefontaine, is it, and thought, wow, the French won the World Cup in 1998. The French won the World Cup in 2018. How can we do that? So I think what I very often, my experience of the English and the French, they sit there looking at one another, thinking, how have they done that? How did they do that? And I think in this particular case, without wanting to be too flippant about it, is the French need to stop looking at the English thinking, how are they doing this, and just get on and do it. And so that's they need to effect a cultural change through the way in which they engage with football, I think.
Okay, thanks for that, Simon. So yeah, thank you for joining us. Thank you for that. I think everyone's really enjoyed the conversation, as we can see from the message that are coming in as well. I think it's been great to hear your take on it all. So thank you, Alex, for joining me hosting. Thank you to the rest of the Future Money team that work on it behind the scenes. So Ian, as you all know, as well as Adam and Maiwen. And thank you to a few other people as well, because thank you to the Franco-British Chamber for promoting this event and sharing it on their social media and on their website. And thank you to NRPR, who also helped to promote the event through their social media. If you don't already follow us, you can find us on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. We're everywhere. And if you find one of them, you'll find them all. And this recording will, of course, be available on YouTube forever. So feel free to share it, join us on other events. And if you'd like any more information or you'd like to talk about anything specifically, then just get in touch. It's so interesting to see we've got people from all over the world joining us, and hopefully we'll continue to grow that network together. So yeah, thank you everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah.